You did everything right. You went to college because everyone told you that's how you get a good job. Your parents said it. Your teachers said it. The guidance counselor said it. Society said it. Get a degree, get a career, build a life. So you went. You took out loans because tuition was $25,000 per year, and you didn't have $100,000, and nobody does. You were 18. You signed the papers. You studied hard. You got the degree. You graduated with $35,000 in debt. The average. You weren't reckless. You went to a state school. You worked part-time. You did what you were supposed to do. And now you're 28 years old, making $45,000 per year in a job that 10 years ago didn't require a degree. And you're paying $400 per month in student loans for the next 10 years. That's $48,000 you'll pay back on $35,000 you borrowed. And that $400 per month is money you can't use to save for a house or invest or build wealth. It's gone. Every month for a decade. If you've ever felt like college was supposed to be an investment in your future, but instead it's an anchor dragging you down. If you've ever wondered why you're paying so much for a degree that doesn't seem to pay off the way it was supposed to. If you've ever felt trapped by debt you took on when you were too young to understand what you were signing, this video is for you. Because college debt isn't just a burden. It's a wealth transfer. It's a system that extracts money from young people and working-class families and transfers it to lenders, to institutions, and to a generation that got their education for almost free. Today we're going to break down exactly how this system works, who benefits, who pays, and why it was designed this way. Let me tell you what this feels like, because if you have student loans, you know this weight. You get your first real job out of college. You're making $45,000. After taxes, you take home maybe $34,000. That's $2,800 per month. Your student loan payment is $400. Your rent is $1,200. You now have $1,200 per month for food, transportation, utilities, phone, healthcare, and every other expense. Plus trying to save something, anything, for emergencies or the future. You budget carefully. You eat cheap food. You drive an old car. You don't go out much. You're doing everything right. But you're not getting ahead. You're 28 and you have no savings. No emergency fund. No retirement account beyond maybe the minimum for an employer match if you're lucky. You're living paycheck to paycheck on a salary that's supposed to be middle class. And every month, $400 goes to student loans. That's $4,800 per year. Over 10 years, that's $48,000. If you could invest that money instead at a 7% return, over 10 years, it would grow to $66,000. Over 30 years, it would grow to $450,000. That's not a typo. $450,000. That's the opportunity cost of your student loans. That's the wealth you don't get to build because you're paying back debt for an education. That was supposed to give you opportunity. And here's what makes it worse. You look at your parents' generation. Your dad went to a state university in 1978. Tuition was $700 per year. He worked a summer job and paid for it. No debt. He graduated, got a job, bought a house at 30. Your mom went to community college, then transferred to finish her bachelor's. Total cost maybe $3,000 over 4 years. She paid as she went. No debt. They both have good careers. They're comfortable. And they tell you, we paid for our own college. You kids just need to work harder and not take on so much debt. And you want to scream because they have no idea what they're talking about. Tuition at the same state university your dad attended is now $12,000 per year for in-state students. $48,000 for a 4-year degree. You can't pay that with a summer job. A summer job pays maybe $5,000. You'd need 10 summers. You can't work full-time during the school year because you're taking a full course load. And even if you worked 20 hours per week during school, that's maybe another $8,000 per year. $13,000 total. You're still $35,000 short for tuition alone. That doesn't include housing, food, books, fees. The actual cost to attend is closer to $70,000 for 4 years. Your parents paid $3,000. You paid $70,000. And they think you're the irresponsible one. Here's what you were promised. Go to college, get a degree, and you'll earn $1 million more over your lifetime than someone with just a high school diploma. That was the pitch. And it was true in 1980. But it's not true the same way now. Let me show you the math, because this is where the trap becomes visible. In 1980, the average cost of 4 years at a public university was about $10,000 total. The median starting salary for a college graduate was about $16,000 per year. Within a few years, you'd be making $20,000 to $25,000. A high school graduate was making $12,000. The college wage premium, the extra earnings from having a degree, was significant. And the debt was negligible. $10,000 in education costs, paid off quickly or avoided entirely by working while in school. Now let's look at today. The average cost of 4 years at a public university is about $80,000 to $90,000, including living expenses. The median starting salary for a college graduate is about $55,000 per year. A high school graduate makes about $35,000. The college wage premium still exists. $20,000 per year more with a degree. Over 40 years, that's $800,000 more in lifetime earnings. Sounds great. But here's the trap. You're starting with $60,000 in debt on average, paying it back over 20 years at 5% interest. That's $90,000 in total payments. Your $800,000 lifetime earnings premium just became $710,000. And that's before we account for the opportunity cost of not investing that money. But it gets worse. That $20,000 per year wage premium assumes you get a job that actually uses your degree. 40% of recent college graduates are underemployed, working in jobs that don't require a bachelor's degree. If you're one of them, you're making $40,000 instead of $55,000. You're making only $5,000 more than a high school graduate, but you have $60,000 in debt. Over 20 years, you'll pay $90,000 to earn an extra $5,000 per year. That's $100,000 in extra earnings minus $90,000 in debt payments. You're net positive $10,000 over 20 years. That's $500 per year, $40 per month. You paid $90,000 over 20 years to earn $40 more per month. That's not an investment, that's a scam. And even if you're in the 60% who are employed in jobs that use your degree, let's look at the wealth building impact. You graduate at 22 with $60,000 in debt. You pay $900 per month for 10 years. That's $108,000 in total payments. Your friend who didn't go to college started working at 18 making $30,000, and by 22 is making $35,000, no debt. They're saving and investing that $900 per month you're paying in loans. Over 10 years, at 7% returns, they accumulate $150,000. You've paid $108,000 and accumulated zero. By age 32, they have $150,000 in wealth. You have zero. It'll take you another 10 years of saving just to catch up to where they were at 32. And that's assuming equal savings rates, which is hard when you were also paying loans for the first 10 years. The person who didn't go to college is ahead of you in wealth accumulation until you're in your 40s, even though you're earning more per year. The debt offset the wage premium. The wealth transfer already happened. Here's the economic concept: credential inflation and positional goods. Credential inflation means that the same job that required a high school diploma in 1980 now requires a bachelor's degree. The job didn't change. The skills needed didn't change, but the credential requirement went up. Why? Because when everyone has a high school diploma, employers use bachelor's degrees to screen candidates. When more people get bachelor's degrees, employers require master's degrees. The credentials inflate, but the jobs and the pay don't necessarily improve. You need more education to get the same job, which means you pay more and take on more debt for the same outcome. This is an arms race. Everyone gets more education to compete, but the relative advantage disappears because everyone else is doing the same thing. The only winners are the universities charging for the extra credentials. Positional goods are goods whose value depends on your position relative to others. A college degree used to be a positional good. If you had one and most people didn't, it gave you an advantage. Now that most people have one, the advantage is gone. But you still need one to avoid being disadvantaged. This is called the Red Queen effect, from Alice in Wonderland. You have to run just to stay in the same place. You need a bachelor's degree not to get ahead, but to avoid falling behind. And that degree costs you $60,000. You're paying $60,000 just to be on par with everyone else. That's not an investment in getting ahead. That's a fee for entry into the middle class. And it's a fee that your parents didn't have to pay. Now let's talk about where that $60,000 goes, because this is where the wealth transfer becomes clear. You borrow $60,000 from the federal government or private lenders. Over 20 years at 5% interest, you pay back $90,000. $30,000 of that is interest. That $30,000 is profit. Where does it go? To the lenders. The federal government makes a profit on student loans. Private lenders make a profit. You're transferring wealth from yourself to the lending system. But it's worse than that. The $60,000 you borrowed went to the university. Where did the university spend it? Some on education, sure. But also on administration, on buildings, on amenities, on sports facilities, on bloated executive salaries. The average university president makes $400,000 to over $1 million per year. The number of administrators has ballooned. Universities spend more on non-educational staff than on faculty in many cases. Your $60,000 is paying for bureaucracy and luxury amenities that don't improve your education. And the university keeps raising tuition because they can. Because students will pay. Because students have access to loans, unlimited loans. If students couldn't borrow, universities couldn't charge as much. But because loans are available, universities can charge whatever they want and students will take on the debt. This is called the Bennett hypothesis, named after a Reagan-era education secretary. The availability of student loans allows universities to raise prices without consequence. Your debt enables their price increases. You're transferring wealth from your future to their present. Here's how the system works and why it was designed this way. In the 1970s and 80s, state governments funded about 70% of public university budgets. Students paid 30% through tuition. States saw higher education as a public good, an investment in the state's economy and workforce. They funded it. Over the next 40 years, state funding dropped. By 2020, states fund about 30% of public university budgets. Students pay 70% through tuition. This is a deliberate policy shift. States cut taxes, especially on the wealthy and on corporations. Those tax cuts reduced state revenue. To balance budgets, states cut higher education funding. Universities responded by raising tuition. Students responded by taking on more debt. This is a direct wealth transfer. Taxes that used to pay for education were cut, benefiting the wealthy. The cost was shifted to students in the form of tuition and debt. The wealthy got tax cuts, students got debt. That's the transfer. But why did states cut funding? Because of a political and ideological shift. In the 1980s, there was a push to reduce government spending, to cut taxes, to privatize public goods. Education was reframed from a public good to a private benefit. If you benefit from education by earning more, you should pay for it yourself. This sounds fair on the surface, but it ignores the fact that society benefits from an educated population. It ignores the fact that previous generations got their education subsidized by the state and used that to build wealth. It's pulling up the ladder. Boomers got cheap college, then voted to defund it. They got theirs, then made you pay for yours. And they did it because cutting taxes was politically popular. And students are young and don't vote in large numbers, so there was no political cost to making them pay more. The student loan system itself is designed to transfer wealth. Federal student loans are guaranteed by the government, which means lenders have no risk. If you default, the government pays the lender. The government then collects from you, and they can garnish your wages, your Social Security, your tax refunds. You cannot discharge student loans in bankruptcy. This is unique. Every other kind of debt can be discharged in bankruptcy. Credit card debt, medical debt, even gambling debt, but not student loans. Why? Because in the 1970s and 80s, there was a moral panic about people getting educated, then declaring bankruptcy to avoid paying for their degrees. There's no evidence this was actually happening at scale, but the narrative was powerful enough to justify changing the law. In 1976 and again in 2005, bankruptcy protections for student loans were eliminated. This gives lenders enormous power. They can lend to anyone at any amount with zero risk, and the borrower can never escape the debt. It's indentured servitude with extra steps. You sign the papers at 18 and you're locked in for life. Private lenders also exploit students. Private student loans have variable interest rates, fewer protections, no income-based repayment options. They're more expensive and more predatory than federal loans. But students take them because federal loans have limits on how much you can borrow per year. If your cost of attendance is $40,000 per year and federal loans only cover $27,000, you have to make up the $13,000 somewhere. Private loans, Parent Plus loans, work 3 jobs, or don't go to college. Most students choose debt. And the private lenders know this. They market aggressively on campuses. They partner with universities. They profit enormously. The student loan industry is worth over $1.7 trillion. That's trillion with a T. That's wealth extracted from students and transferred to lenders. For-profit colleges are even worse. They target low-income students, minorities, veterans, people trying to improve their lives. They promise job placement, career advancement, good outcomes. They charge enormous tuition, often more than non-profit universities. They have low graduation rates, terrible job placement rates, and many shut down, leaving students with debt and no degree. The University of Phoenix, ITT Tech, Corinthian colleges, these for-profit chains extracted billions from students via federal loans, delivered substandard education, and collapsed. Students were left with debt and worthless credentials. The owners walked away rich. This is wealth transfer at its most predatory. Tax dollars in the form of federal student loans went to for-profit companies, enriching executives and shareholders, while students got debt and broken promises. There's also the employer side of this trap. Employers require degrees for jobs that don't need them because degrees are a cheap screening tool. Why spend money training workers when you can require a bachelor's degree and hire people who already paid for their own training? Corporations have externalized the cost of workforce development to individuals and to the student loan system. You pay $60,000 to get trained for a job that the company benefits from. They should be paying for that training. Instead, you pay. And they reap the benefits of your skilled labor without investing in developing those skills. This is another wealth transfer. From workers to corporations, you pay for the education. They get the productive worker. They win twice. Here's the racial and class dimension. College debt disproportionately burdens Black and Latino students. Black graduates owe an average of 25% more than white graduates. 12 years after starting college, the median Black borrower owes 113% of their original loan balance because they're more likely to struggle with payments, more likely to be in forbearance or deferment where interest accrues, more likely to be in default. White borrowers at the same point owe only 65% of their original balance because they're more likely to be in repayment or to have paid off loans entirely. Why? Because Black families have 1/10 the median wealth of white families, due to centuries of systemic racism, slavery, sharecropping, redlining, employment discrimination. Black students can't rely on family wealth to avoid debt. They borrow more. They struggle more to repay. They get hit harder by interest. The student debt system compounds racial wealth inequality. It's a mechanism for transferring wealth away from black and brown communities and concentrating it with lenders and institutions. Working-class students of all races face similar dynamics. If your parents are wealthy, they can pay for your college. You graduate debt-free. You start your career able to save and invest immediately. If your parents are poor, you borrow everything. You graduate with debt that takes decades to repay. By the time you're financially stable, the wealthy kid who had no debt has been building wealth for 20 years. They're buying houses, investing, accumulating. You're paying down debt. The wealth gap widens. Education was supposed to be the great equalizer. Instead, the debt system turned it into a wealth stratification mechanism. Rich kids get educated for free and build wealth early. Poor kids get educated on debt and build wealth late, if ever. The system reproduces inequality while pretending to solve it. So what are you supposed to do? If you already have student debt, you have limited options. First, if you have federal loans, make sure you're on the right repayment plan. Income-driven repayment plans cap your monthly payment at 10 to 15% of discretionary income. After 20 or 25 years, remaining balances are forgiven, though you may owe taxes on the forgiven amount. This isn't ideal, but it's better than defaulting. Second, pursue loan forgiveness if you qualify. Public service loan forgiveness forgives loans after 10 years if you work for government or nonprofit and make 120 qualifying payments. Teacher loan forgiveness, disability discharge, closed school discharge, these exist for specific circumstances. Look into them. Third, refinance private loans if you can get a lower interest rate, but be careful. Refinancing federal loans with a private lender means you lose federal protections like income-driven repayment and forbearance. Only refinance private loans, or only refinance federal loans if you're absolutely certain you can afford the new payments. Fourth, pay extra toward principal when you can. Every dollar above the minimum payment goes toward principal and saves you interest. Even small extra payments make a difference over time. Fifth, avoid forbearance and deferment unless absolutely necessary. Interest accrues during these periods and capitalizes, meaning it gets added to your principal and you pay interest on interest. It makes the debt grow. Only use these as last resorts. Sixth, advocate for debt cancellation. This is political. Individual repayment is your current reality, but collective action can change policy. Support politicians who back student debt cancellation, tuition-free college, increased higher ed funding. Join debtor unions, make noise. The system won't change unless borrowers demand it. If you're deciding whether to go to college, the calculation is harder now. For some careers, degrees are required. Medicine, law, engineering, teaching, you need the credentials. For others, the ROI is questionable. A degree in humanities or social sciences from an expensive private university might not pay off financially. This doesn't mean those fields aren't valuable. They are, but the debt might outweigh the earnings. If you're going to college, minimize debt. Go to community college for 2 years, then transfer to a 4-year school. Live at home if possible. Work part-time. Apply for scholarships and grants. Choose a state school over private. Compare costs and outcomes. Look at salary data for your field. Don't borrow more than your expected first-year salary. If your first job will pay $40,000, don't borrow more than $40,000 total for 4 years. This is conservative, but it keeps debt manageable. Consider alternatives. Trade schools, apprenticeships, coding boot camps, certifications. Not every good job requires a bachelor's degree. Electricians, plumbers, vac techs, dental hygienists, web developers, Many of these careers pay well and require less than 4 years and less debt. The stigma against trade work is classist nonsense. Skilled trades are valuable, in demand, and often pay better than many bachelor's degree jobs. Don't go to college just because society says you should. Go if it makes sense for your career goals, and you can afford it without crushing debt. And if you do go, be strategic about it. But here's the reality. Individual choices can't fix a structural problem. Even if every student makes the perfect choice, the system is still broken. We need systemic change. We need federal policy. First, cancel existing student debt, at least partially. $50,000 per borrower would eliminate debt for about 80% of borrowers and massively reduce burden for the rest. This isn't a handout. It's correcting a policy failure. Previous generations got subsidized education. Current generations got debt. Cancellation evens the playing field. Second, make public universities tuition-free. This is not radical. Germany, Norway, Finland, they do this. Many countries do. We did it in California until the 1980s. It's possible. Fund public universities adequately through taxes, especially on the wealthy and corporations who benefit from an educated workforce. Stop making students pay individually for a public good. Third, reinstate bankruptcy protections for student loans. If student loans can be discharged in bankruptcy like any other debt, lenders will be more careful about who they lend to and how much. This will put pressure on universities to control costs because students won't be able to borrow unlimited amounts. Fourth, cap interest rates on student loans at 0 or near 0. Education loans should not be profit centers. If the government can loan money to banks at 0% during financial crises, it can loan money to students at 0% for education. Fifth, regulate for-profit colleges out of existence, or at least prevent them from accessing federal student aid. They're predatory. They don't serve students. They extract wealth. Shut them down. Sixth, tie federal funding to universities to tuition freezes and cost controls. If a university wants federal research dollars or student aid eligibility, they have to limit tuition increases and administrative bloat. Seventh, expand need-based grants instead of loans. Pell Grants used to cover a much larger share of college costs. Expand them to cover full cost of attendance for low-income students. No loans needed. Eighth, create debt-free pathways through service. Free college in exchange for public service, teaching, healthcare work in underserved areas. This invests in both education and community needs. Here's the truth. College debt is a wealth transfer from young people, working-class families, and communities of color to lenders, universities, and a system that benefits from your indebtedness. You were told education is an investment. For previous generations, it was. The state paid for most of it. You got educated, got a good job, built wealth. For your generation, it's a trap. You pay for it yourself through debt. The degree gets you a job, but the debt prevents you from building wealth. You spend your 20s and 30s paying back loans instead of saving, investing, buying homes. The lenders collect interest. The universities collect tuition. You collect debt. And the generation that got their education for free tells you you're financially irresponsible for having debt they would have had if the system worked the same way for them. You deserve what they had. Affordable, accessible higher education that doesn't require decades of debt. The fact that you don't have it isn't an accident. It's the result of deliberate policy choices. State disinvestment, tax cuts for the wealthy, privatization of public goods, deregulation of lending. These choices benefited the people who made them and harmed you. Changing it requires seeing it clearly, naming it honestly, and fighting collectively. You're not in debt because you made bad choices. You're in debt because the system was redesigned to extract wealth from you. That's not your fault. That's policy. And policy can be changed. Cancel student debt. Make college free. Fund education publicly. Treat it as a right and a public good. not a commodity and a profit center. Your parents' generation got that. You deserve it too. Don't accept a system that charges you $60,000 for a ticket to the middle class and tells you you're lucky to have the opportunity. That's not opportunity. That's extraction. See it for what it is and demand better. Because you deserve an education that builds your future, not one that mortgages it.